the note, at least to me, feels very kind of weird that it's almost like off the cuff, hastily written. The sentence structure isn't particularly good. Does that ring true to the person you interacted with for so many hours in terms of just the way he speaks?
Well, it does and it doesn't, but it seems to me he was probably very stressed being in the special housing unit because that's a really bad environment. That's the worst of the worst in the prison. If you want protective custody, you're with the bad boys and they yell and scream all night, and it's just harrowing to be in the shoe, is what I understand. Fortunately, I never went because I obeyed the rules. But I think that he was probably very stressed at that moment and was just scribbling.
So you mean just
sure looks that way.
that it's just a chaotic, it's a lot of noise from the inmates at all times?
It's terrible. I mean, guys used to pretend that they were suicidal just so that they could get moved down to the suicide unit and get a good night's sleep.
So, look, you spent a lot of time with him. And obviously, what, people are saying, that this may not have been suicide. There are some people who believe it was murder. Your take is really important because you spent as much time with him as anybody in the weeks leading up to his death. Do you believe this was suicide?
100%. I'm sure he killed himself.
Why?
Well, first of all, you had to be in the prison. For somebody to get in there and murder him would take a big conspiracy involving a lot of people. And those guards would have withered under interrogation. They weren't really ready for prime time. Half of them had PTSD from fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it wouldn't have worked. That conspiracy would have unraveled immediately. And additionally, I watched him ratchet down emotionally after he couldn't get bail from the judge. He couldn't give up his island and his airplane and get out as he had before. And he was facing life behind bars for the rest of his life, and he was not ready for prison. He confessed that he'd been bullied by black kids when he was growing up, and he was afraid of black inmates. He was afraid of inmates. I mean, most of his conversations centered around, how am I going to deal with this place? He was really apprehensive.
Was that something he talked a lot about, like just being afraid of inmates, or
feeling
like he needed protection?
Yes, absolutely. Do I need a big black guy to protect me?
Did you speak with other inmates who were around him at the time he died, and did they kind of give their take on whether they felt it was suicide or not?
Yeah, the only one was a guy who worked in the kitchen with me, who was in for trying to set up a drug deal on True Links, which is the email program accessible to inmates. He got caught and thrown in the shoe, and when he came out to general population after he'd served his time, he told me he had the cell next to Epstein, and nobody came in and out of that unit at all that night. Nobody did the count, and he heard Jeffrey tearing up sheets and actually spoke to him that night, through the bars.
What did he say? Yeah.
Oh, it was something about, are you okay, Jeffrey? I forgot. It was some conversation that didn't matter. It had nothing to do with suicide or anything.
So just to connect the dots, the tearing up of the sheets, those would be the pieces of material that the government says Jeffrey Epstein used to kill himself, to hang himself or strangle himself.
I don't know about the shoe, but we got a lot of sheets. We would hang lines in the cell so you could go to the bathroom, without the other guy watching you, or have a little privacy, even though it's 35 square feet. And we just had access to a lot of sheets and blankets. And so it doesn't surprise me that he had 4 or 5 sheets in the cell. You all had that.
This note was actually written 2 weeks before Jeffrey Epstein actually died, when he made his first attempt at suicide. It was not successful, but that's when the note was written. Did you speak to him in that 2-week period? Did you speak to him, and did he talk about possibly being suicidal?
He never talked to me about being suicidal. He did come back to the suicide unit after that episode with the cop who killed 4 people or was accused of killing 4 people. And I asked him what happened, and he said, "I don't know. I just got up to get a drink of water. That's all I remember." And I just looked at him and said, "I spent a lot of time with you, Jeffrey, and this is the first time you lied to me. I know you're lying to me." But I didn't push it because that wasn't my role.
You spent hours next to him and you talked to him a lot. Did he ever talk to you about the allegations against him, whether he felt he was framed, whether he felt he was a scapegoat? Did he cop to any of it? Was any of this discussed?
No, I had no discussions therein with him about his crime.
You're
Why
such
not?
a smart
Yeah.
guy, and you're inquisitive. You're a writer. It just seems odd to me. Why wouldn't you ask him about what everybody in the country was talking about?
Well, when you're in an environment among criminals, it's sort of an unwritten rule. You don't ask a whole lot of questions like that. We all committed a crime. We're all criminals, and that's sort of the attitude. And my role as a suicide watcher, I felt, was to make him feel like life was worth living. And discussing his charges and whether he felt that they were justified was really, I just didn't feel it was within my purview. Though I do wish I'd asked him about Prince Andrew in retrospect.
Did he ever mention him?
No.
So
I mean, I asked him stuff like, when was the last time Bill Clinton had sex with Hillary? And he just looked at me like, Mercy, I thought you were better than that.
So what I hear you saying, William, is that this thing that we always see in movies and TV about, hey, what are you in for? That inmates say that to each other. Does that happen?
Yeah, that does happen, but sometimes seasoned inmates will look at you cross-eyed when you ask that question because it's sort of out of bounds. But I was curious I'm just a curious individual. Like,
Yeah.
What did this guy do? And, there were all kinds of, different charges, a lot of drug dealers, a lot of gunslingers. And, a kid who held up a CVS with his finger in his pocket ended up in federal. Just a lot of weird stuff.
I've talked to you before, and you've talked about just Epstein's general demeanor in the days leading up to his death, and you seem to think there's relevance in just the way he was even eating. Can you go into that?
Oh, well, I knew that he was going back to the shoe on this particular night because the shrinks had told me. And it might be the last time I was ever going to see him. So, I went downstairs doing my 7 to 11 shift, and he was eating his chicken dinner on the floor, sitting on the floor. He'd never done that. And I asked him, "Jeffrey, why are you sitting on the floor? What's going on?" He said, "It's just easier this way." He just looked resigned to his fate and very depressed. And up until that point, when he thought that maybe he could get bail from the judge, he had moments where he sort of drifted off, and I could tell he's disengaged from the conversation. He's thinking about, "Oh my God, I'm in deep trouble here." But mostly he was fairly upbeat. But that night, he was definitely not upbeat after he couldn't get bail. I think he was facing the reality that he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison, along with the government that I'm sure was asking him to cooperate and telling him that we will mitigate your circumstances if you tell us what we want to hear, which is basically who is involved in this whole pedophile ring.
So, William, based on your conversations with Jeffrey Epstein, based on what you've heard from other inmates who were in there at the time, do you have any reservations about whether or not he actually killed himself by suicide?
Oh, I think I'm like 99.99% that he killed himself. I mean, I know all the forensic evidence and all the arguments, but if you were in that prison for a year and hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein and just watching, the entire place, there's no way that somebody got in there and killed him. I just don't believe that. He did it himself.